What if Hitler destroyed the Third Reich? The moment he believed he could conquer the Soviet Union, not at Berlin, not in the bunker, not when Germany burned, but on one cold morning, June 22nd, 1941, 3 million soldiers moved east. Engines screamed across the border. The largest invasion in human history had begun, and for a moment it looked unstoppable. Cities vanished, armies collapsed. Europe watched in terror as Hitler appeared untouchable. But beneath the speed, beneath the fire, beneath the roar of blitzkrieg, something invisible was waiting. Distance, winter, hunger, time. Welcome to the channel where history is not remembered, but relived. Subscribe and tell us which forgotten darkness of history we should uncover next. Because tonight, we step into Operation Barbarossa, the invasion that did not just fail, it slowly signed Germany's death warrant. In August 1939, the world watched something unnatural crawl out of the darkness. Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, two regimes built on fear, blood, surveillance, mass graves. And suddenly, they shook hands. The photographs still exist. Hitler smiling in Berlin, Stalin raising glasses in Moscow, diplomats applauding beneath chandeliers while Europe held its breath. But the records lie, because this was never peace. It was a pause between two predators staring at the same corpse. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact shocked the world because it felt impossible. Hitler had spent years screaming about destroying Bolshevism. Stalin had spent years condemning fascism as a mortal enemy. And yet now, they embraced like allies. A silence that speaks volumes. Behind closed doors, secret protocols carved Eastern Europe into pieces like meat on a butcher's table. Poland, the Baltics, Finland, Romania. Borders became pencil marks waiting to bleed. And somewhere in Warsaw, ordinary people went to sleep believing treaties still mattered. They did not know that their country had already been sentenced to death before the first bullet was fired. Then September came. Germany attacked from the west. Weeks later, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. Poland was crushed between two machines that hated each other almost as much as they hated weakness. Under the weight of 1,000-year-old dust, we found a heartbeat. A Polish mother running through smoke with a child pressed against her chest. Railway stations drowning in panic, soldiers retreating with blistered feet and empty rifles. The sky itself seemed to mourn over the ruins, and while cities burned, Hitler and Stalin exchanged congratulations. That is the part history sometimes whispers too quietly. The two most dangerous men in Europe smiled for photographs, while secretly preparing to betray each other, because neither man truly trusted the other, not for 1 second. Hitler viewed the pact as temporary theater, a mask, a strategic lie designed to buy time before the real war began. And Stalin knew it. You can almost feel it in the atmosphere of the Kremlin, cigarette smoke hanging beneath dim lights, advisors speaking carefully, every sentence weighed against fear, every silence potentially fatal. Stalin had built a regime where paranoia was survival, but paranoia has a cruel paradox. The longer you survive betrayal, the harder it becomes to recognize the final knife. Meanwhile, Hitler's victories intoxicated Europe. Poland collapsed, Norway collapsed, the Netherlands collapsed, Belgium collapsed. Then France, the great military power of Western Europe, fell in only weeks. The impossible had happened so quickly that reality itself began to feel unstable. German officers marched beneath the Arc de Triomphe, while terrified civilians watched from shattered windows. And somewhere inside Hitler's mind, something dangerous was growing. Not confidence, certainty. He no longer believed he could lose. That is where the invasion of the Soviet Union truly began. Not on a battlefield, but inside the psychology of a man who had started confusing luck with destiny. Because Hitler did not see the East as merely territory. He saw it as prophecy. Lebensraum, living space, a racial empire stretching across endless land, the destruction of what he called Judeo-Bolshevism. This was not simply strategy anymore. It was obsession wrapped in ideology, and obsession has a terrifying habit throughout history. It blinds intelligent men right before they walk into catastrophe. By 1941, Britain still stood alone, but wounded. Europe trembled beneath German boots, and millions began believing the same myth. Hitler believed about himself that the Third Reich was unstoppable. That myth would kill millions, and very soon, it would drag Germany itself into the abyss. June 22, 1941. At 3:15 inches the morning, the silence shattered. Not metaphorically, physically. The eastern horizon exploded beneath artillery fire, so massive that entire villages believed the earth itself had cracked open. The sky burned before sunrise, windows burst inward, telephone wires screamed in the wind, and across nearly 2,000 miles of frontier, Operation Barbarossa began. The largest invasion in human history. More than 3 million Axis soldiers. Thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft, an iron flood pouring into the Soviet Union with terrifying speed. The records lie when they reduce it to numbers, because numbers cannot describe the sound of mothers waking to exploding ceilings, or the taste of dust inside the mouths of children buried beneath collapsing walls. A Soviet border guard, stumbling from his post with blood running into his eyes, unable to understand why the horizon itself seemed to be on fire. Entire Soviet units vanished before dawn. Some soldiers died, still pulling on their boots. Some died while trying to answer telephones connected to command centers that no longer existed. A silence that speaks volumes. Because in the first hours of Barbarossa, confusion killed almost as efficiently as bullets. German bombers ripped through Soviet airfields with surgical brutality. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed before ever leaving the ground. Pilots burned alive inside machines they never had the chance to fly. And still, the German columns kept moving. Fast, relentless, almost unreal. Panzer divisions sliced through Soviet defenses like knives through wet cloth. Entire roads disappeared beneath endless rivers of steel. Engines growled day and night. Tracks crushed farms, churches, graveyards. The invasion did not feel human anymore. It felt mechanical, industrial, like Europe itself had become a machine designed to erase nations. And behind it all stood Hitler, intoxicated by victory. Poland had collapsed. France had collapsed. Western Europe had folded in weeks. Now many German officers genuinely believed the Soviet Union would disintegrate before winter. That arrogance infected everything. The maps, the strategy, the ideology. Because Nazi doctrine did not merely see Slavs as enemies, it saw them as inferior, replaceable, disposable. And history becomes especially dangerous the moment human beings stop seeing other human beings as fully human. Soon the roads of the Soviet Union filled with refugees, old men dragging broken carts through smoke. Women carrying blankets instead of suitcases because there was no time left to choose what mattered. Burned villages darkened the horizon while the sky itself seemed to mourn above the ruins. Some mothers abandoned homes without knowing where they were running, only that they had to run. And still, the Germans advanced. Minsk, Smolensk, thousands captured, then hundreds of thousands, entire Soviet armies surrounded and swallowed whole. The speed became psychologically terrifying. Even German soldiers began whispering the same dangerous thought: the war was already won. That illusion spread through the ranks like narcotic smoke. Victory felt inevitable. Destiny felt real. But history hides its deadliest traps inside moments of supreme confidence. Because beneath the triumph, beneath the collapsing Soviet front, beneath the roar of blitzkrieg, something vast was waking up. Something patient, something Germany did not yet understand. Distance, industry, winter, and a nation that refused to die quietly. Long before the first German tank crossed the Soviet border, the warnings had already arrived. Again, and again, and again. British intelligence warned Moscow. Soviet spies warned Moscow. Even German troop movements screamed the truth across Europe. But inside the Kremlin, reality had become dangerous, because Joseph Stalin trusted no one. And that may have been the cruelest paradox of all. A dictator who spent his life hunting betrayal ultimately became blind to the one betrayal that mattered most. The records lie when they portray Stalin as calm and prepared. The atmosphere inside Moscow in June 1941 felt poisoned by fear. Advisors spoke carefully. Officers measured every word, as if language itself could become a death sentence, because under Stalin, truth had become lethal. Years earlier, his purges had gutted the Red Army. Experienced commanders vanished into prisons, interrogations, execution chambers. Men who once understood warfare disappeared into snow-covered graves, while terrified replacements learned one lesson above all others: never tell Stalin what he does not want to hear. A silence that speaks volumes. So when intelligence officers warned that Hitler was preparing an invasion, many reports were dismissed as provocation, lies, British manipulation, even as German divisions gathered near the border like storm clouds thickening before apocalypse. And then the storm came anyway. When Barbarossa began, Stalin reportedly refused at first to believe it was real. Imagine the psychological horror of that moment. Telephones ringing endlessly through the Kremlin, explosions echoing from the western frontier, officers entering rooms with pale faces and trembling hands. And somewhere beneath the smoke of burning cities, an empire, realizing it had been caught asleep beside a knife. For several terrifying days, one of the most powerful men on earth disappeared into silence while his country burned. A Soviet radio operator waiting for orders that never came. A commander staring at a map already useless because German tanks had moved faster than information itself. Some units fought desperately. Others dissolved into chaos. Entire Soviet armies became trapped inside massive encirclements. Hundreds of thousands captured in pockets of hunger and panic. Endless columns of prisoners marched beneath armed guards through roads lined with corpses and abandoned equipment. The sky itself seemed exhausted from watching so much suffering. And inside prisoner camps, starvation became another weapon. Men ate grass, leather, anything. Some died, whispering names no one would ever hear again. The invasion was no longer merely military, it had become existential. A war designed not simply to defeat the Soviet Union, but to erase it. And still, something deeply unsettling began to emerge beneath the catastrophe. The Soviet Union did not collapse. That was the first crack in Hitler's fantasy. Because every previous enemy had broken under blitzkrieg pressure. Poland collapsed, France collapsed, the Balkans collapsed. But the Soviet Union kept fighting while bleeding from every direction. Factories continued moving east, railways continued operating. New soldiers continued arriving from the depths of the country like shadows emerging from endless darkness. Hitler believed terror alone could destroy nations. But terror sometimes creates something else: endurance. And far beyond the burning front lines, beyond the smoke and shattered roads, the Soviet Union was beginning to transform into something far more dangerous than Germany expected. A wounded giant learning how to survive. At first, the map still looked beautiful to Hitler. Every week, more Soviet territory disappeared beneath German arrows. Cities fell, villages burned, front lines shattered and rolled backward like collapsing tides. To Berlin, it looked like destiny unfolding exactly as promised. But maps can lie, because maps do not show mud. They do not show starvation. They do not show the sound a horse makes before collapsing into frozen dirt after dragging artillery for days without rest. The deeper Germany marched into the Soviet Union, the more victory began to look like suicide, a silence that speaks volumes. By late summer, the invasion had stretched itself across impossible distances. Supply lines grew thin like fraying veins, struggling to feed a body moving too fast. Fuel trucks disappeared into endless roads. Spare parts vanished. Ammunition arrived late. Food arrived rotten. And then the rains came. Not ordinary rain. The sky seemed to grieve over the invasion itself. Roads dissolved into oceans of mud during the Rasputitsa. Entire German convoys sank axle-deep into the earth. Tanks spun helplessly like trapped beasts. Boots disappeared beneath thick black sludge that swallowed movement and hope together. A German mechanic scraping frozen mud from an engine with bleeding fingers while icy wind cut through his lungs. A soldier sleeping beside a broken tank because there was nowhere left to go. A horse trembling violently before collapsing into silence beneath artillery harnesses. The invasion was slowing, not because Germany lacked weapons, but because geography itself had entered the war. Hitler believed speed could defeat distance, but distance in Russia was not merely physical. It was psychological. Endless forests, endless roads, endless horizons that seemed to stretch beyond human endurance itself. And while German soldiers pushed deeper east, the Soviets were doing something Hitler barely understood. They were retreating strategically into space, burning crops, destroying railways, dismantling entire factories, piece by piece, before German forces could capture them. The records lie when they describe it coldly as industrial relocation. Imagine the terror of workers dismantling machinery while hearing artillery thunder closer every hour. Women loading factory equipment onto trains beside crying children. Engineers sleeping beside steel parts inside. Overcrowded rail cars moving east through endless darkness. Thousands of factories disappeared beyond the Ural Mountains, like ghosts fleeing extinction. And somehow, Soviet industry survived. That was the moment Barbarossa began quietly transforming into something else. Not a lightning war, a war of exhaustion, a war Germany was never designed to win, because blitzkrieg depended on speed, shock, collapse. But the Soviet Union refused to collapse completely. Every mile Germany conquered demanded more fuel, more ammunition, more lives, and still the land kept stretching endlessly ahead like a nightmare with no horizon. The Germans captured cities, roads, rail lines, but the Soviets preserved something infinitely more dangerous, their ability to keep fighting. That was the hidden heartbeat beneath the chaos. The secret Hitler failed to understand. Because nations do not truly die when they lose territory. They die when they lose endurance. And the Soviet Union, battered, bleeding, humiliated, was still breathing. By the autumn of 1941, Germany stood at the edge of what looked like total victory. Leningrad in the north, Ukraine in the south, Moscow in the center. The Soviet Union appeared wounded everywhere at once. And yet, beneath the triumph, something dangerous was happening inside Hitler's mind. The records lie when they describe Barbarossa as a perfectly coordinated campaign. Because by this stage of the invasion, the German high command had begun quietly fracturing from within. Generals argued over maps late into the night beneath dim lights and stale cigarette smoke. Voices lowered, nerves tightening. Every decision now carried the weight of millions of lives. Most German commanders wanted one thing: Moscow, the political heart, the railway center, the symbolic spine of the Soviet Union. Take Moscow, many believed, and the Soviet system might collapse entirely. But Hitler no longer thought like a general. He thought like a prophet trapped inside his own mythology, a silence that speaks volumes. Again and again he overruled experienced commanders. Again and again strategy bent beneath ideology, ego, obsession. The dictator who trusted no one slowly stopped listening to the only people who understood war. Instead of focusing entirely on Moscow, Hitler divided his attention. He became consumed by Ukraine's resources: Soviet grain, oil, industry, territory. And so the German advance fractured into multiple directions, like a blade splitting before impact. Then came Kyiv, one of the largest encirclements in military history. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers trapped, exhausted men wandering through smoke-filled fields with empty rifles and cracked lips. Some collapsed from hunger before captivity even began. Others burned documents with trembling hands, while artillery thunder rolled across the horizon like the voice of approaching extinction. A young Soviet officer staring at the sky above Kiev, realizing the roads behind him had already been sealed shut. The encirclement was catastrophic for the Red Army, a massive German victory. Hitler celebrated it as proof that his instincts were superior to his generals. But victories can become traps when they feed arrogance faster than wisdom, because Kiev cost something Germany could never recover: time. Weeks vanished, the road to Moscow narrowed, the weather darkened, and then winter arrived. Not metaphorical winter, real winter. The kind that freezes breath inside your lungs before you finish exhaling. The kind that turns metal into torture. German soldiers had expected victory before the cold came. Many still wore thin uniforms designed for autumn campaigns, not apocalyptic frost. Engines froze during the night. Oil thickened. Rifles jammed shut beneath layers of ice. The sky itself felt hostile now. Merciless wind clawed through uniforms and skin alike. Some soldiers wrapped newspapers around their feet because proper winter boots never arrived. Others slept beside frozen machinery, praying their fingers would still move by morning. Many woke to frostbite already eating through flesh, a silence that speaks volumes, because for the first time since the war began, German soldiers started feeling something unfamiliar creeping beneath the surface of their confidence. Not exhaustion, not frustration, fear. And beyond the frozen roads leading toward Moscow, the Soviet Union was still alive. By December 1941, the road to Moscow had become a graveyard of certainty. German forces stood terrifyingly close to the Soviet capital. Some soldiers claimed they could already see the distant glow of Moscow against the winter sky. After months of invasion, bloodshed, and relentless advance, victory still felt almost within reach. Almost. But history often hides catastrophe inside that word. Almost. The records lie when they describe the German advance as merely slowed. This was something darker. The invasion was freezing alive. Engines died during the night like suffocating animals. Fuel thickened inside frozen machinery. Rifles jammed shut beneath layers of ice. Men woke with their uniforms stiff from frozen sweat. Breath crystallized instantly in the air before vanishing into the white void surrounding them. The cold was no longer weather. It had become an enemy, a silence that speaks volumes. German soldiers wrapped blankets around boots already soaked with frostbite. Some tied rags around their faces to stop skin from tearing beneath the wind. Others stared silently into the snow with hollow eyes, too exhausted even to speak fear aloud. A 19-year-old German infantryman pressing numb fingers against a photograph from home while artillery thunder rolled across the frozen horizon. A Soviet mother carrying water through shattered Moscow streets while anti-aircraft sirens screamed overhead like wounded animals. Two civilizations colliding beneath a sky that seemed determined to erase them both. And then the Soviets struck back. Fresh Siberian divisions arrived from the east, disciplined, winter-trained, wrapped in white camouflage that made them appear almost ghost-like against the snow. Stalin had gambled everything on one terrifying calculation that Japan would not invade Siberia. And when intelligence confirmed it, he moved his eastern armies west toward Moscow. The counter-offensive exploded across the frozen front. For the first time in the war, the German army learned what retreat felt like. That moment shattered something far greater than military momentum. It shattered the myth. Until then, the Wehrmacht had seemed unstoppable. Poland collapsed. France collapsed. Europe collapsed. German officers had begun believing victory was not merely possible, but natural. Now they watched soldiers retreat through snowstorms with frost-bitten hands and broken equipment, while Soviet artillery hammered the horizon day and night. The illusion of invincibility began bleeding out into the ice. And somewhere deep inside the German command structure, panic quietly started replacing confidence. Because officers finally understood the truth they had been avoiding for months. This war would not end quickly. It might never end cleanly at all. What happens when a nation builds its identity around victory and suddenly discovers defeat waiting inside the snow? That psychological fracture mattered more than maps, more than territory. Because Barbarossa did not fail in one catastrophic moment. It failed slowly, silently, like a giant bleeding internally while still marching forward, unaware that death had already entered the body. And beyond the frozen fields outside Moscow, the Soviet Union was no longer merely surviving. It was learning how to break Germany back. Operation Barbarossa did not destroy Germany in a single explosion. It destroyed Germany slowly, like frost creeping through a dying body, like poison entering the bloodstream long before the victim understands he is already doomed. The records lie when they describe Barbarossa merely as a failed invasion. No, this was the moment the Third Reich began bleeding to death from wounds it could never close. Because after 1941, Germany was trapped inside the kind of war it had never prepared to survive. A multi-front war, an industrial war, a war of endurance. And endurance was the one thing Hitler's empire secretly lacked, a silence that speaks volumes. The deeper Germany sank into the Soviet Union, the more resources vanished into the abyss. Fuel, steel, ammunition, men. Entire generations swallowed by distances too vast and winters too merciless for ideology to conquer. Meanwhile, beyond the Ural Mountains, Soviet factories kept breathing, day and night. Steel melting beneath orange firelight. Women building tanks beside exhausted children sleeping on factory floors. Railways carrying reinforcements endlessly westward, like arteries feeding a wounded giant refusing to die. Hitler believed Barbarossa would destroy communism. Instead, it united the Soviet Union through terror-rage survival. And history becomes especially dangerous when suffering gives nations a reason to endure at any cost. Then came Stalingrad, the city where the German army stopped looking invincible and started looking mortal. Street by street, building by building, men freezing beside corpses they no longer had the strength to bury. Some soldiers fought for rooms so shattered by artillery that nothing remained except dust, blood, and echoes. A starving German soldier writing one final letter home while Soviet artillery shook the ruins around him like the wrath of history itself. Then Kursk, the largest tank battle ever fought. Steel colliding against steel across burning fields while the Soviet war machine grew stronger and Germany slowly ran out of time. That was the hidden truth beneath Barbarossa. Germany never recovered the initiative again. Not truly. Every road after 1941 led backward. Backward through retreat. Backward through ruin. Backward toward Berlin. And eventually, backward into the bunker beneath a dying city where Hitler sat, surrounded by maps of an empire that no longer existed outside his imagination. The invasion meant to build a 1,000-year empire, ultimately created the conditions for its destruction. Was it worth the cost? Millions dead, cities erased, entire generations traumatized by hunger, fire, executions, mass graves. The shadows of Barbarossa did not end in 1945. The shadows never truly end. They wait. Because this story is not only about Hitler, it is about what happens when nations become intoxicated by superiority, when propaganda replaces reality, when leaders mistake conquest for destiny. Are we truly different today? Or do modern societies still hunger for enemies to blame, myths to worship, victories to chase at any cost? That may be the most terrifying question history leaves behind. Because the road to catastrophe rarely begins with monsters. It begins with certainty. And somewhere beneath the frozen silence of the Eastern Front, the echoes are still speaking. Operation Barbarossa did not only destroy armies, it destroyed illusions. The illusion that power makes nations immortal. The illusion that hatred can build a future without eventually devouring itself. And maybe that is why the Eastern Front still feels haunted, even now. Because beneath the snow, beneath the silence, beneath the millions of graves, history left us a warning written in blood. Human beings become most dangerous the moment they believe they are unquestionably right. If this truth weighs heavily on your heart, leave a sign below. Subscribe and walk with us deeper into the shadows history tried to bury, because next time, the snow turns red at Stalingrad, and the empire that marched east begins hearing death breathe behind it.